Okay, so we're going to begin our intrapersonal unit by talking about perception. Now, perception and communication is how we go through our daily lives and how we perceive all sorts of the people and the objects that we interact with, and how we make sense of these perceptions by using previous experiences to help filter and organize the information we take in. Okay. For example, my water bottle. When I see my water bottle, my perception, I'm perceiving that there's going to be water in it. And when I take a drink of it, it's going to be refreshing, right? That would be a huge violation to my perception if I picked it up and there was Diet Coke in it. I'd be like, oh no, who did this? This is isn't what I was expecting today, right? But maybe for someone else, when they saw my water bottle, they think, ooh, Diet Coke. Okay. Perception helps us filter out and organize the information that we take in. Now, the perception that we make of others and others make of us affect how we communicate and act. Okay. My favorite example is this picture right here. It says perception. And in the middle, it says, this is how my parents see me, right? And they see this little baby. Okay. Your parents see like the little baby, right? Or how my friends see me right there on the left. Maybe like you're the comedian in your friends, right? Your friends are like, oh, that guy's so funny, right? And then you have how my teachers see me. They see you differently than the way your parents see you or your friends see you, right? How my sister sees me is different than how, your parents view you. And then how you see yourself, right? That's the intrapersonal perception there. Okay. All the others, yeah. These are intrapersonal perception or interpersonal perception. And how I see myself is my intrapersonal perception. So perception is a process. So perception is the process of selecting, organizing, and interpreting information. It's a 3-step process. We respond differently to an object or a person that we perceive favorably than we do to something we find unfavorably, right? If you're walking through the grocery store and you're hungry and you see a cake, you got a big old sweet tooth, you're going to be like, man, I'm going to pick that up for dinner. Compared to if you're walking to the grocery store and you're hungry and you see a bunch of onions, you're not favorable to that, right? So you're not going to select the onions over the cupcake. All right, so selection. I'm going to have you think about the grocery store again when we talk about selection. So selection is the first part of the perception process in which we focus our attention on certain incoming sensory information. In this stage, we select stimuli to which we attend to that gets our attention. We select stimuli from our 5 senses. So taste, hearing, sight, smell, touch. That's how we select what to pay attention to. Believe it or not, that's what you select is based off of what you either taste, hear, see, smell, or touch, right? So think about the grocery store. You're like, I don't know what I'm going to have for dinner tonight. And so you start pushing your cart around the store, right? And then all of a sudden, you smell the fresh oranges in the produce section. And you're like, oh, I'm going to grab some oranges. Maybe I'll have some oranges after dinner, right? And then maybe you're still walking through the produce section and you hear someone say, okay, I'll pick up some chicken tonight. And you're like, oh, chicken. Chicken's on sale. I'm going to get chicken, right? Now, there's visual and auditorial stimulation. And this is associated with salience, which is the degree to which something attracts our attention in a particular context. Now, As communicators, we can use this knowledge to our benefit by minimizing distractions when we have something important to say. Now, visually and aurorally stimulating things become salient in our perception field and get our attention, right? Knowing that we have salience, knowing that we have favorable gut reactions to communicate is important to know. Our verbal and our nonverbal cues can sometimes be distractions, okay? Salience is what helps us understand that serious conversations or arguments have a right place and a right time, right? If you're having an argument with your spouse, an appropriate place for that to happen is at home, right? Your salience says, hey, you have an argument, you need to talk about something serious, you do it at home. You don't do it in the middle of a crowded restaurant, okay? So when you hear salience, I want you to think of selecting the best place that is distraction-free and the best place to have those conversations. Needs and interest. We tend to pay attention to information that we perceive to meet our needs or interest in some way. Okay? Needs and interest are another form of selection, just as stimuli are, right? So look at this picture. This person represents our homework, and this person represents us, and then Netflix walks by. We'd much rather pay attention to Netflix, right? We have needs and interest in Netflix, right? You don't really want to do homework. You'd much rather watch Stranger Things, okay? Another example of needs and interest helping us with our selection is if you're filtering through radio stations, you likely already have an idea of what kind of music interest you will stop at, or what station you're going to play, or what genre you're going to skip until you get to the one that you are interested in, okay? So think of like playlist, right? On shuffle, you just keep hitting it until you find a song that you like. That's selecting. That's making a selection based off needs and interest. Expectations is another way that we make selections. So we can find expected things salient and find things that are unexpected salient as well, right? Again, salience is that stimulation, right? That distraction, those nonverbal and verbal cues that tell us when to select something. So for example, if you're expecting a package to be delivered, you might pick up on the slightest noise of a truck engine or someone's footsteps approaching your front door, right? Since we expect something to happen, we are more in tuned, right? We're paying more attention to extra clues and stimulation coming in. Okay? So we have this expectation. I have something coming in from Amazon. I am listening for the truck because I can't wait to try on, I don't know, my new shoes. Okay? Now, in terms of the unexpected salience, your unexpected expectation is, let's say you have a very shy friend that's very soft-spoken. And then you overhear them one day raising their voice, right? Talking to another friend. You'll pick up on that and you go, oh, something's wrong here. Like, this isn't the ordinary. This is unexpected. Like, hey, what are you upset about? And then we have organizing information. That's the second step of the perception process, in which we sort and categorize information that we perceive based on innate and learned cognitive patterns. So we organize information that we select into patterns based off of proximity, similarity, and difference. Oh, what happened here? So these strategies for organizing information are so common that they're built into how we teach our children basic skills and how we function in our daily lives. Okay. We organize information without even knowing it, right? And we also pass on this proper way of organizing things without even knowing it, right? We're creating these meanings of organization. So, what is proximity in organization? So, proximity is when we tend to think that things that are close together go together. So, for example, think of kiss cams at a baseball game, right? We've all seen those awkward, sometimes hilarious accidents made by the media team at the baseball game, right? And they think two people are in a relationship because they're sitting next to each other, when in fact it may be your sister. Okay, that is proximity. So we tend to think things that are close together go together. The next one, similarities. I like to think of similarities as a refrigerator. Okay, we organize our refrigerators based off of similar looking or similar acting things together. So, such as this picture here, right? Herbs, all the herbs go together, all the vegetables go together, just like all the fruit goes together, and all the beverages go together on a separate shelf. This is organizing by similarity. We do this with people too, right? You think, oh, okay, this kid goes with this kid, so they're the same age, right? So they're going to be in the same classroom together. Similarities. Now, difference. In this case, we assume that the item that looks or acts different from the rest doesn't belong with the group. And it's kind of like this picture of these eggs. One of the eggs is completely different from the other eggs, even though that they're all eggs, right? We assume, oh, that egg goes with a different group of eggs. Now, organizing differences sound bad, especially when we have perceptual errors involving people and assumptions of difference that can make it especially awkward, if not offensive. Okay. Organizing something off a difference is a little tricky, but we do it without knowing. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about, so that was the end of the perception process. 3 steps. Sorry, that's not the end of it. So punctuation is we organize interactions and interpersonal experiences based on our firsthand experiences. Punctuation refers to the structuring of information into a timeline to determine the cause and the effect of our communication interactions. So this helps us learn where does a conflict begin and end. And the answer to this question depends on how the people involved in the conflict punctuate or structure their conflict experience. Punctuation differences can often escalate conflict, which can lead to a variety of relationship problems. So punctuation, right? If my firsthand experience says that if someone doesn't text me back, they don't ever want to talk to me again. Okay. Even though that maybe that person that didn't text you back was, I don't know, in Cabo on a cruise. They didn't have access to their phone, so they couldn't text me back, right? So one person's thinking this conversation's over, we don't have a relationship anymore. And the other person's just like, oh man, my phone died. Okay. That's what punctuation is. It's a difference from firsthand experiences and how we structure it. Interpreting information is the third part of the perception process, in which we assign meaning to our experiences using mental structures known as schematics. Schematics are like databases of stored or related information that we use to interpret new experiences. An example of this is the Great Folder debate. What color is math? Some people would say red, some people will say blue, some people will say yellow, right? It is our perception that our math folder in school has to be a certain color. Okay? And that's all based off of our intrapersonal relationship. Okay? Maybe you're like me and you're like, you know what? Math makes me very angry. It makes me very upset. So you make math red because you associate being angry with red. Schematicas like that are used to interpret our behavior and our impressions about who they are, what we are, how we should react to it. Okay, so now that's the end of the perception process. Now we perceive others just as much as we perceive ourselves. So just as others make impressions on us, we make impressions on others. We have already learned how the perception process works in terms of selecting, organizing, and interpreting. In this section, we'll focus on how we perceive others, with specific attention to how we interpret our perceptions of others. So we like to perceive others through attribution and interpretation. Okay. Attribution is very similar to expectations. We attribute something, we attribute a behavior for another reason. Okay. So for example, you are in the car driving somewhere and someone yells at you, right? You're probably attributing that that person is having a bad day. Because why else would you react so strongly to something like driving? Okay. So we seek to attribute the cause of others' behavior to internal or external factors, just like the car example. Internal attributions connect the cause of behaviors to a personal aspect, such as personality traits, right? You'd be like, oh, like Gary's just funny. That's why Gary laughs at the funeral. That's an internal attribution based off of personality. External attributions connect the cause of behaviors to situational factors. Okay? So that's like, I'm at Disneyland. I'm expecting the lines to be very long. I'm attributing that the lines are going to be very long and I'm going to be very upset sitting in that line. Okay? The situation is that you're in Disneyland and it's busy. You're going to assume that your behavior and your friend's behavior is going to be different because of that external factor. Now, attributions are important to consider because our reactions to others' behaviors are strongly influenced by the explanations that we reach. Now, there's a few attribution errors. The first one's a fundamental attribution error. And this just means when our attributions are wrong, right? When our assumptions are wrong. Now, fundamental or FAE refers to our tendency to explain others' behavior using internal rather than external attributions. Okay, so let's say you get a parking ticket. You're like, oh my gosh, why did I have to get a parking permit? I pay the school enough already to be able to park wherever I want. I can't believe this. It's awful. That's internal, right? You're like, hey, I'm not in the wrong here. I should be able to park wherever I want. Now, the external attribution is, someone has to be the police officer and enforce parking spaces, right? Or parking appropriate parking matters. Okay, that's an external attribution. When we get a parking ticket, we're never like looking at it and going, man, I'm so glad this person did their job today. No, right? We're always like, another parking ticket. Why can't I just park here for free? Okay. Now, perceptual errors like FAE can also be biased. And in the case of the self-serving bias, the error works out in our favor. Okay. Now, self-serving bias is a perceptual error through which we attribute the cause of our success to internal personal factors, while attributing our failures to external factors beyond our control. So let's say you get a really good grade on a paper. Your self-serving bias says, yes, you did so good. Like, you're the best. That's why you deserve this A. Now, on the opposite end, if you receive a bad mark on your test, your self-serving bias is most likely to say something like, man, that test was really hard. My teacher was a really strict grader on this test. I did really poorly on this because I didn't eat breakfast. Okay? That's your self-serving bias. That's an attribution error. Now, first impressions are powerful forces in the perception process. Why? Because it's the primary effect of perceptual tendency to place more importance on initial impressions than later impressions, right? You remember someone's best impression. Okay. The recency effect is the perceptual tendency to place more importance on the most recent impression over earlier impressions, right? This is like when you give someone a second chance. Maybe the first time you met them, you were like, whoa, they're crazy. They talk way too much. And then the second time you meet up with them, you're like, oh, wow, I was wrong. This person does not talk enough. So that is impressions and interpretation. Okay, another thing in regards to impressions and interpretation is what is called the halo effect and the horn effect. Okay, the halo effect describes a perceptual effect that occurs when initial positive impressions lead us to view later interactions as positive, right? If I meet someone and right off the bat, we clicked, we talked, it was fun. I thought they were a really cool person when I walked away. Later on down the line, I'm going to think the same things. Now, the opposite, the horn effect, describes a perceptual effect that occurs when initial negative impressions lead us to view later interactions as negative. Okay. One is creating more trust and better value. The other creates lesser value and low trust. Physical and environmental cues such as clothing, grooming, attractiveness, and material objects influence the impressions that we form on people, right? And again, our salience, the things that we're attracted to, our senses, help us make this impression. Maybe you really like the color purple and you see someone walking around wearing all purple. You're like, man, I like that person. I like their style. That's impression. Okay. You are attributing that because they wear purple, they got good style. Now, another way that impressions affect our interpretation is through cultural identities such as race, gender, sexual orientation, class, ability, nationality, and age affect the perceptions that we make about basic sensory information, such as sounds and smells, as well as larger concepts such as marriage and privacy. Okay. What I mean by that is, for example, if you look at my grandma, she may be listening to the TV at sound volume 100, right? You're like, Grandma, that's really loud. And you yourself are like, hey, that's way too loud. Can we turn it down to, I don't know, 10? Okay. This perception of the TV being too loud is a form of cultural identity. The next one we're going to talk about is personality, how personality affects our perception. Our personality traits, which are our underlying and enduring motivations for thinking and behaving the way we do, affect how we see others and ourselves. We use observed and implied personality traits to form impressions of others, which then influence how we act towards them. This is very similar to the Myers-Briggs test, okay? The Myers-Briggs test is a simple personality traits test that gives you, I think it's like four types of interpretations that you use, okay? So I have a very positive personality, right? So when I meet someone, I'm always assuming the best about that person. My perception is that strangers are just friends I haven't met yet. That's because I am a ENFJ, a caring, enthusiastic individual who's organized, diplomatic, responsible, skilled, and have great connection for people, value for connection of people. The next section in this chapter is perceiving and presenting self. So our self-concept, talked about this in the first lecture too. It's our intrapersonal communication. It's the stuff inside our head. Self-concept refers to the overall idea of who a person thinks he or she is. Your self-concept is built off of your abilities, your beliefs, your values, your goals, your social interactions. And these are things that you find important, okay? So again, going back to, let's say you have this self-concept that you're a surfer, right? You know you're a surfer, right? Your self-concept, you're a surfer because you have this goal of riding a really big wave. And you have the ability to balance on a surfboard. And you have these values that you think you have to practice supporting every day. You have this belief system that surfing is the best meditation for you. And then socially, you're friends with other surfers. This is you perceiving yourself as a surfer, okay? Now, each person's self-concept is influenced by context, meaning that we think differently about ourselves depending on the situation we are in. So sometimes we feel like we're the coolest person in the room, right? And other times we think, you know what, I don't really belong in this room, and we get really shy. That is a self-concept being influenced by context. Now, in some situations, personal characteristics such as our abilities, personality, and other distinguished features will best describe who we are, right? So you ever been asked, like, who are you? Tell me about yourself. We tend to start listing our self-concept in terms of abilities, beliefs, goals, social, and value, okay? Two theories that we talk about when discussing perceiving and presenting ourselves is the concept of the looking glass self, which explains that we see ourselves reflected in other people's reaction to us and then form our self-concept based on how we believe other people see us, okay? So in this image here, I know it's a little hard to read the words, right? It says how my mom and dad see me, right? And they see you as this perfect angel, right? So when you're with your mom and your dad, you're probably really nice and polite. And then over here is how it says how my ex-girlfriend sees me, right? Like, oh, you're such a bad person, such an evil person, right? That's your looking glass self. You don't believe any of those things, right? You have a better idea who you are, what your self-concept is, but other people look at you differently. And so you behave differently around those people. So, for example, I'm a teacher, right? I'm a professor. When I interact with you or interact with my boss, I'm very professional. I'm very formal, right? But when I'm with my friends or I'm with my family, I'm a lot less formal. That's the looking glass self. It's changing how you perceive yourself based off of how people perceive you. Now, social comparison theory is another theory we talk about, and it states that we describe and evaluate ourselves in terms of how we compare to other people. This is like social media, right? This is when you're scrolling through Instagram and you see all these people doing all these cool things and you start to feel bad, right? Because you're comparing yourself. It's like this meme, stressing about life. Oh, let's check our social media and start comparing life to others. It's not good to do that when you're feeling stressed about life. I'll tell you right now. Okay? Social comparison theory is when we look at other people and we try to determine how we measure up to them. Your looking glass self is how we see ourselves reflected in other people's reactions. Like, oh, I know this person doesn't like me because every time I see them, they growl at me. That's your looking glass self. Self-esteem. Self-esteem, self-efficacy, and self-concept are clustered together. Self-esteem refers to the judgments and evaluations we make about our self-concept, right? It's influenced. Our self-esteem is influenced by our self-concept. While self-concept is a broad description of the self, self-esteem is more specifically an evaluation of ourself, right? So our self-concept says, hey, we're a surfer. Our self-esteem says, oh, but am I really? Okay. Your self-esteem is your confidence. It's evaluating yourself. Concept. Your self-efficacy refers to the judgments people make about their ability to perform a task within a specific context. So your self-efficacy says, I know I have the ability to perform surfing. Okay. Self-esteem isn't the only factor that contributes to our self-concept. Perceptions about our competence also play a role in developing our self. Oops. A few other things that influence our self-perception include social and family influences, right? Who your family thinks you are, who you're associated with. Media, right? We hear a lot of times that media is very effective on people, right? It tells us how to look, how to behave, what's considered social norms. Culture, right? The self-enhancement bias, meaning that we tend to emphasize our desirable qualities relative to other people. Our self-presentations is the process of strategically concealing or revealing personal information in order to influence other people's perceptions. Okay. So influences on self-perception include social, family, media, self-presentation, culture, right? So how do we improve perception? That's the last section of this chapter. We can simply improve self-perception by avoiding reliance on rigid schema, right? Thinking critically about socializing institutions, intervening in self-fulfilling prophecies, finding supportive interpersonal networks, and becoming aware of cycles of thinking that distort our self-perception. It's more self-love, right? We can improve our perception of others by developing empathetic listening skills, becoming aware of stereotypes and prejudice, and engaging in self-reflection. Now, perception checking is a strategy that allows us to monitor our perception of and reaction to others' communication. Perception checking is just simply asking yourself, am I organizing this selected information negatively? Okay. So your key takeaways from this lecture is the 3 steps of the perception process: how we perceive others, how we perceive and present ourselves, and how we can improve our perception later on. This is the end of the lecture. I look forward to your discussions.